Okay, so another episode of Finding Common Ground. Wayne, good to see you again. And we have a special guest, Ted Koch. Ted, wonderful seeing you. Appreciate you making the time to be here. And Ted, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. The listeners, the audience, I think they would love to hear your background, what you have done, and what you're currently affiliated with today. And we're going to quickly find that there's a lot of overlap in what we do and what Ted does. So we'll dig in on that as the conversation develops. So Ted, hand it to you.
Well, thank you guys for having me. So I'm Ted Koch, the executive director of the North American Grouse Partnership. But before that, I spent a 30-year career as an endangered species biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, retiring from the Southwest region where I oversaw the endangered species program, including lesser prairie chickens. And so when I retired, the Grouse Partnership Board called, asked if I wanted to apply for the executive director job, and I thought, no. And here I am. Because I thought, well, if I don't do it, who will? Will I get done right? And actually, you guys, and Wayne particularly, had a big influence on me. I grew up a conservative Republican in Connecticut. I moved to Idaho, where I live today, decided I am not a conservative Republican in Idaho, but I've been kind of politically adrift ever since. But the reason why that's relevant to this conversation is I'm a strong believer in private property rights and free markets. And working for 30 years for the federal government as an endangered species biologist, I never thought of conservation the way you guys do. But I've since realized how important that is. Well, when I became executive director of the Grouse Partnership, I helped stand up a group of rancher conservationist heroes who have chosen to call themselves the Lesser Prairie Chicken Landowner Alliance. And their number one issue is they wanted to get paid fair market value for the ecosystem services that they have on their lands. They don't want subsidies. They don't want cost share. They don't want incentives. They know they've got a lot of resources of great value: clean air, clean water, more abundant water, healthy soils, vegetation, wildlife, carbon storage. And they just want to get paid fairly for that. And like I said, not subsidies, cost shares, incentives, these failed government programs, the business model that we've been operating with for over 40 years now, that has resulted in us continuing to lose 2 million acres of grasslands every single year. So that's what's brought me here today. I'm super grateful for the partnership that we've formed over the last decade plus, and I look forward to crossing the finish line soon.
Appreciate that, Ted. And I know you and Wayne worked very closely back in the early days of LPC Conservation's Programmatic Conservation Banking Agreement, which was mostly approved out of Region 2 Fish and Wildlife Service, where you were. I was fortunate enough to come across your presence there in the Albuquerque office a time or two. So it was great working with you then. But I have to say, as impactful as you were to our operations with the Conservation Banking Agreement, I just love where you're at today. And I think you're doing some great work with LPC LA. So we'll definitely be digging in on that as we move forward. You mentioned something that I think Wayne and I talk a lot about, which is providing ranchers value for the stewardship that they are putting in and day out across the Great Plains. And just to make sure the listeners remember, and maybe first time they've heard this, but ranching is the lowest value land use on the Southern Great Plains. Just leaving habitat as Mother Nature has built it is actually the cheapest return you can possibly get out there in terms of making a living. If you break it out and you turn it into dry land, it's worth a whole lot more money, even if you use it or if you sell it. If you irrigate the ground, it's worth even more money. And if you put wind turbines or solar arrays on it, it's worth a heck of a lot more money on top of that. So we really do have an upside down economic valuation of native prairies that are intact across the Great Plains. So what we do, Wayne and I, and what you do through LPCLA is trying to find a way to turn that upside down and find a way to at least make it valuable enough so that ranchers keep ranching and they don't sell off the ranch to someone else that's going to break it out or turn it into the next energy development. If you don't mind, given that you had the front row seat at Fish and Wildlife Service during at least one listing decision, probably two with lesser prairie chicken, can you give us a sense of of what you learned while you were there, and has anything actually changed in terms of the bird's health and the bird's progress towards recovery?
Yeah. So, as many of your listeners may know, grasslands are the most threatened ecosystem on the continent and in the world. Grassland birds have declined more than birds in North America, more than birds from any other ecosystem type. Shore birds, oceanic birds, wetland birds, forest birds, grassland birds have declined by 50% in the last 50 years. And so it's no surprise that species like the lesser prairie chicken are starting to show up as candidates for listing in the Endangered Species Act. Now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has found, without exception, since 1998, that listing of chickens is warranted. Their status has not improved any since then. So what the upcoming decision is going to be, I don't know. But what I've learned from these ranchers is just what you said, Adam. So the West Prairie Chicken Landowner rights, I got all these ranchers on the phone. I called around. I said, "Hey, I'm Ted Koch, North American Grouse Partnership. I want to save chickens in ranching." And they all said to me, "Sorry, Ted, we're not interested in saving chickens in ranching. We want to save ranching and chickens." And we thought, you know what, maybe we have a lot in common. And it's true, because 84% of remaining grasslands are privately owned working rangelands. Ranching pays less than any other form of land use, as you just said. That's why grasslands are the most threatened ecosystem on the continent and in the world. It is just that simple. It's a matter of money. If you own grasslands and you want to make money, the last thing you would choose to do is ranch. You'd break it out to one of those other land uses, like you said, Alan. So that's why Western prairie chickens are threatened. That's why they'll continue to be threatened until we find a way to support ranchers keeping grass free and silent.
Ted, that's great. This is you started in Connecticut. I hear I'm in Massachusetts today. Daughter graduates this weekend, so very proud day for mom and dad on the journey of life. But my heart's in the Southern Plains and the grasslands, as we've talked on previous shows. I've got a family ranch with my brother down in Southwest Texas. On some maps, disputed by some researchers, it shows prairie chickens used to be down there, many, probably over 100 years ago, but clearly there's none there now. So Ted, I want to take you back real quick to the Fish and Wildlife Service. So as Adam said, you got to see this whole thing from a public servant regulator's perspective. There was a lot of programs that were highly touted at the time, both federal farm bill programs, state programs. We're gonna really fix it this time. Back circa 2012, 2013. We talked about the market value obviously being a component that probably those programs did not achieve, which is why the chicken continues to decline, and why we hope our program can reverse that. But any other lessons learned from that era? I know it's a long time ago, but might be helpful for the listeners to understand, why does this thing just keep boomeranging back and forth?
Well, the primary program that came to be in the 20 teens was initiated by Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And there's two reasons, in my opinion, why that didn't work very well. First of all, the main threat to lesser prairie chickens is habitat loss and fragmentation. And their approach to mitigating that was to address habitat quality. Well, if the main threat's habitat loss, and you authorize the loss, and you don't replace the loss, then you're going to continue to lose. The other is they built it really on the model of the Farm Bill conservation title programs of the day, which is partial payments to implement a practice that may or may not help the species or the landowner. It's a partial payment, so the landowner still has to pay out of their own pocket. It doesn't address the fact that ranching pays less than any other form of land use. And what's really interesting, I was just at a meeting 2 weeks ago, you guys, on how to save grasslands for the next 30 years. And several different speakers got up and talked about, 20, 30 years ago, I and all my colleagues thought ranching was bad. Bad for the land, bad for conservation. Now we realize if we don't save ranching, we won't save grasslands. And so there's been this real convergence, particularly over the last decade, I think, you guys, where conservationists who want to save the most threatened ecosystem on the planet realize that to do so, they must save ranching. And to save ranching, we have to make it pay. It's just that simple. And so those programs from 10 years ago, Wayne, they didn't make it pay. Well-intentioned, designed, using the best information we had at the time, but it just didn't work out. We didn't get the job done. And that's why we're here today.
On the ranching front, Ted, today, for those that follow it, and I realize many don't, except maybe when they go to the meat market, cattle prices are higher. And I've heard a few people say, "Hey, these ranchers, they're gouging everybody. They don't need any help." I mean, that's not what I'm hearing from the ranchers today. What are you hearing?
Yeah, no, not at all. In fact, I did the math with one of my ranchers. He figures he's back to the same profit margins he had about 30 years ago. Over the last 30 years, my understanding is mainly supply chain related constraints. You have four major importers, meat packers, wholesalers. The domestic producer keeps getting squeezed out, and more of our beef keeps getting imported because of that. And so maybe for the time being, we're back to American ranchers are back to where they were 30 years ago, and they're not counting on it staying that way for very long. In fact, the Trump administration just announced another big push to import more Argentinian beef, which will only hurt our ranchers in the long. So that's it. I mean, it's just in the ag field. One of my politically conservative beliefs is subsidies distort markets and harm our environment more than any other single thing that I can think of. And that nowhere is that more true than ag subsidies, like subsidies for tilled ag. You can get paid a lot of money to break out ground, even if you never grow a crop. And so, as Adam mentioned earlier in this conversation, Adam, there's a strong incentive to do anything but range. And so, for folks who think ranchers are making a lot of money now, they're making more money, and we're not sure how long that'll last. It's certainly not a lot of money compared to historical measures.
Yeah, and ranching on the Southern Great Plains is no guaranteed way to make
Right.
money, period. Goodness.
Right.
You deal with drought, you deal with disease, you deal with all kinds of environmental problems, and herd sizes are actually record lows. They're not high, even though prices
Yeah.
are. And to build a herd up, you're susceptible to macroeconomic swings in commodity prices, and you're susceptible to environmental change, or whatever, drought cycles, so on and so forth, hail damage, whatever the case may be. So it's not easy being a cowboy. It just isn't. And so if the lesser prairie chicken is going to recover, to your point, Ted, I appreciate you really doing the deep dive on why these other programs, whether that was farm bill programs or these other CCAAs, as we call them, candidate conservation agreement with assurances, that were on the landscape during the other listing decision processes, they didn't get the job done because they were half measures, and
Right.
they were partial payments, as an example, or they were doubling down on existing habitat, just making it more suitable, not actually
Yeah.
expanding habitat. So I appreciate that. It may seem like nuance to some people, but that's exactly why these programs have not delivered recovery for the lesser prairie chicken. So what you're trying to do, and what we're trying to do, is try to make grasslands more valuable so that we can have more of them. And we can actually incentivize existing farm operations to convert back to native range where they can continue to graze. Well, not continue to graze, but they can actually have cash flow year in, year out by grazing, as long as the grazing, of course, is managed as appropriate for the lesser prairie chicken and its habitat needs. Well, I appreciate
That's right.
that. And, I'm curious, if you could, we've talked about 250 for 250 here on our podcast. And for those in the audience that maybe this is the first time you're listening to us, 250 for 250 is a bit of a bold, innovative way of trying to keep the lesser prairie chicken off the list. And the way that we propose doing that is providing 250,000 acres worth of lesser prairie chicken conservation. That's permanently protecting working ranches that have chicken habitat on it, expanding around the margins of those ranches so that we can bring existing agricultural land back to native range, permanently protecting that, and then of course managing it. And we're doing we picked the 250,000 acre number because it does coincide with the 250th birthday of our nation. But more importantly, it's a real sizable investment in what the lesser prairie chicken needs, which is habitat. They can count on being there year in and year out. And when you look at the listing decisions that have already come and gone, and Ted, I know you were front row seat for at least two of them. There's a third one as well. And now we're underway on a fourth one. Fish and Wildlife Service keeps saying that the bird doesn't have enough habitat. And the habitat that's out there is actually under threat for being converted over to agricultural land or being utilized for energy development. So what
That's
they
right,
want,
man. Yeah.
yeah, is they need conservation that's quote unquote durable. And to them, durability is not just a conservation easement over a ranch, but it's a conservation easement with a long-term management plan that is focused on maximizing the habitat suitability for the lesser prairie chicken, but also has a third component, and that's a non-wasting endowment. Spins off interest every year to make sure we have enough money to implement that long-term management plan. So those three things together equal durable conservation. And if we give the chicken enough of that, then we give the service a way to reach a suitable listing decision that doesn't put the bird on the list and doesn't burden industry with ESA compliance concerns going forward. Now, you're saying something similar through your LPCLA platform. And I think this is really compatible. What we're pitching for this listing decision could be seen as a launching pad for your bigger, grander vision on the Great Plains. Would you mind sharing that with the audience?
Yeah. So the good news is, thanks to the great work you guys have done, and also the Nature Conservancy in Kansas or in Maine, we have 100,000 acres on the ground in the southwestern Great Plains where ranchers are growing lesser prairie chickens and cows on the same acre. We're already doing it. We're already getting it done. And you guys have helped prove that on 30,000 acres with your conservation banking tool, which is really the gold standard of conservation for the reasons you just said, Adam. Permanent, it's restoration, it's endowed, and management. The other 70,000 that Nature Conservancy has implemented has been what we call Farm Bill Plus. They take the Farm Bill money, which is the partial payments for practices. They raise millions more to make the claimants whole, make the landowners whole. For those are term agreements, they're not permanent. But a lot of ranchers want that because they're not comfortable with permanent. So it's great to have both. But the leadership that you guys have provided by showing we actually can get permanently conserved grasslands in the range of the lesser prairie chicken in a way that keeps ranchers ranching on the ground, which is what they want. The mission of the Lesser Prairie Chicken Landowner Alliance is to save ranching, rural communities, water, and wildlife. And your program does all of that. And it does it fairly. You go to the landowner and you say, hey, we want you to meet these habitat standards and commit to grow lesser prairie chickens forever. How much do you need to get paid? You guys strike a deal, you pay them, and they continue to be able to ranch, which they love the ranching lifestyle. I always say that landowners love grasslands and they value the ranching tradition, but a conservation strategy based on love and tradition isn't getting it done. You guys go and actually pay them to support their habit, their love and tradition habit. So that's awesome.
That's great, Ted. And just on 250 by 250 is just a reminder for the audience. The other part of our 250,000 acres using the banking model would all be certified by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So, if you get in the weeds of these things, as the service goes through, I can't remember if it's round 3 or 4, Adam, it's been several rounds of, doing the listing status review again because yet another federal judge has said, go back and do it again. You messed up something, using our model, all these we could use essentially conservation banks instead of for mitigation towards recovery, which is a really innovative thing to do. So the service has to count these acres.
And let me emphasize that. It's critical for everyone to understand that you guys have a permit from the Endangered Species Agency that says the product you deliver, the quality of the grassland product you deliver meets their standards for saving endangered species. Okay. So all the folks I mentioned earlier, how, in the past, a lot of folks are, ranching is bad. And increasingly like, wait a minute, maybe ranching is good. Well, the ranching that you guys pay for is excellent. It is excellent. Grasslands were made to be grazed. You guys pay these ranchers and help them graze in a way that not only saves lesser prairie chicken, but increases their operational resiliency. Because when they encounter times of drought, they don't have to sell their entire herd off into the teeth of that drought because they've got operational resiliency built in because they're managing consistent with your program to have healthy grasslands, good residual grasses out there that cushion their ability to operate and save chickens and save their ranching operations too. And it's all sanctioned by Endangered Species Agency.
Yeah,
it's really a great outcome.
Yeah, we find that, our business is kind of a specialized conservation real estate business. The service defines the standards of performance for these various ranchers to partner with us for conservation banks and through our profit sharing mechanism, et cetera, to put these easements down. But, we find that we find ranchers that have chickens, they have healthy livestock operations. They're the ones that have been able to keep the current generation on the ranch. They're the ones who've been able to position the next generation to stay on the ranch. They're the ones who've been able to weather the droughts, although very hard, even weather the poor cattle market, which it was for many, many years. So those things go hand in hand. But having said that, Adam said earlier, this bird is habitat limited, and we're dealing with the fragmented habitat you talked about. So now we still haven't got all the best ranches with all the highest number of chickens, and we're working hard to do that as far as the 250. But at some point, and soon we're already planning to look at other ranches who may need to remove cedars, or salt cedar, or even go back from ag to prairie, because you're going to have a net increase in grasslands to get this bird there. And like you said, it's all about the economics.
Well, it's a great time to be doing this. When you just look at the demographic of farmers and ranchers, uh, they're a good bit older than I am, and they don't necessarily have a succession plan in place. So coming to them with a conservation easement approach that also has the endowment supporting long-term management means that it's easier for them to justify handing the ranch over. And it's easy for them to maintain ranching operations moving forward because we've relieved a lot of the economic pressure that, the up and down cycle year after year with cattle ranching and put a lot of pressure on family wealth. And not to mention that when you transfer conserved property to the next generation, for lack of a better term, the death tax is way lower. And oftentimes it can get you below the threshold where you don't even have to pay it. So that's great news. And Wayne, you mentioned the ranchers we've been working with, they're the best of the best. And these ranchers that have been at it for multiple generations in a lot of cases. Once you have those, and we're talking big numbers here, Ted, I think your number is 500,000 acres of conservation bank credits in your plan. We're talking about with 250 for 250, getting us halfway there in the very near term. And you're talking big acres. So eventually you're going to get to a point where you're in a community, you get the largest rancher to jump on board. um, there aren't a lot of other large ranchers that will help you get there to get to scale. So you end up having to work with their neighbors, a section here, a few sections there. But I've found in the scenarios that we've worked with, especially in New Mexico, where I've worked with a lot of entire communities, not just one rancher, but a handful of them, maybe two handful. Those smaller ranchers, they look at it the same way. This is a pressure relief valve on a business model that is too susceptible to environmental drought pressures and other kinds of environmental concerns. So they can come in and, if their section touches the bigger ranch, well, then great, it works because we're looking to build out big blocks of habitat. And we need to make sure that we relieve fragmentation for the chicken so that it can use these strongholds, as we call them, the 25 to 50,000 acres of intact habitat. They can use that as a launching pad to spread out during good times and use it as a refuge to contract into during bad times where they'll know they'll have the cover and they'll have the resources to survive it. So I appreciate all that you do, Ted, and I most importantly appreciate the way you've assembled the board at LPCLA. These are landowners. These are not a bunch of environmental do-gooders. These are not, environmental businessmen like myself and Wayne. These are the people that make a living off the land. I'd appreciate it if you could share with the audience what you've learned from a reformed bureaucrat and now working on an NGO with a landowner focused board. What's
Yeah.
new for
So
you?
nobody loves the land and loves grasslands more than ranchers. I mean, I thought I cared a lot. I know you guys care a lot. Nobody cares more than them. Any solution that does not feature their needs, their ideas, their vision is going to be at best less than what it could be, and at worst, these ranchers have my complete trust. They've told me what they want, what they need. They want to get paid fair market value for ecosystem services. They want to get paid a negotiated contract to produce a conservation outcome. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to do our best to move away from partial payments to implement a practice that may or may not work. And we're going to use the market-based approaches that you guys have taught me.
As long as that constitution of ours stands, we have private property rights. And the Great Plains are, whatever the number is, 90+% privately held. So if we want to restore that ecosystem and protect that ecosystem, we have to find a way to make it valuable enough for landowners to agree to participate. And that's not partial payments. It's not cost shares. It is legitimate payment for value of that habitat.
Now, regulation will not recover lesser prairie chickens. That will never happen. The only way it's going to happen is empower these ranchers to do it on their lands. And they want to do it. They can't afford to do it. To quote one of my landowners, ranchers have subsidized Americans' interest in conservation for generations, and they can't afford to do it anymore.
That's great and so true. You know, I started out as a young guy in East Texas, didn't know a whole lot about ranching. My grandmother and grandfather in West Texas, I learned about ranching as I got older, in my 20s and 30s. I wasn't sure, you know, and got to be into wildlife conservation, how the ranchers were playing into that. But the ranchers I've gotten to know, and the ranchers you've gotten to know, and Adam have gotten to know, I mean, they're just the best salt of the earth people. And you talk about, Adam was talking about communities. You know, one of the places we work is Ashland, Kansas, Scott City, Kansas, and you know, spent years of my life up there in total over the last 14 years or so that I've been doing this. And they're just the best. They're just the best people, man. And getting out there on the land and hearing how they think about conservation and how they think about, you know, new things like regenerative ag and all these, you know, different terms that are coming all the time. It's just really incredible. And I'm so fortunate to do it. And Ted, I think one of the things I want to thank, I had a question for you. I want to thank you. But first, I want to thank you. First, you know, thanks for coming to the table with the actual ranchers. Like that sounds like such an obvious thing, but as a guy who's been playing this mess forever, and as you in your former role were in all this lesser prairie chicken mess, I mean, it's kind of like every time a listing decision was coming around the corner or was in front of a judge, it was the, you know, enviros versus the livestock associations versus these other people. And, you know, some of those folks had good intentions, but a lot of them used a really old playbook where they just argue with each other. And nobody ever went to the landowner and said, you know, Mrs. Jones, Rancher Smith, what do you think? They would turn to the Livestock Association, which sometimes said a lot of the same things, but oftentimes didn't really understand that there's new models of conservation on the ground like ours, you know, and so they would just say, listing bad. I'm not saying listing's good, but listing bad, government overreach. We don't want any of it. Instead of understanding that, like, the listings actually help folks like Adam and I start markets. Now, we'd rather live in a non-regulated world, and we'd like to help get out of a world, but there was some value in creating the beginning of a world where we could have this business and hopefully expand it without regulation. So thanks for that. And my question is, we kind of breezed over this. I know this is mostly about lesser prairie chickens and ranchers, but talk a little bit more about who is this North American Grouse Partners group? I mean, like, where do these guys come from? Why should anybody care what they think about grouse conservation?
So August 20th, 1999, peregrine falcons were removed from the protections of the Endangered Species Act because they were successfully recovered. That ceremony happened in the morning. That afternoon, this is in Boise, Idaho, at the World Center for Birds of Prey, which was run then by Dr. Tom Koch out of the Cornell lab of ornithology. That afternoon, Dr. Cade and his colleagues got together in Dr. Cade's basement, and they looked at each other and said, well, we just spent our whole careers recovering and delisting peregrine falcons. Now what do we do? And they said, you know what? We all love falconry. Our favorite quarry is prairie grouse. Prairie grouse are going down the tubes. Let's form the North American Grouse Partnership. And so it was formed by these conservation legends that saved peregrine falcons from extinction, these falconers who said, let's save prairie grouse. And we've bumped along variously for the last 20 years until recently, really, when we've really been able to focus in on the lesser prairie chicken moment, engage with the landowners, which, by the way, they said what you just said a minute ago, Wayne. I called them up. I'm like, hey, Ted Koch, I want to save chickens and ranching. Sorry, I want to say ranching and chickens. But they said, Ted, no one ever asks us what we think needs to be done. Here's what we think. We need fair market value for this service. So anyway, we really leaned in and we've grown in our influence and our ability. It's just such an exciting time. I feel so fortunate to have Act Two in my professional career. Act One, working for the agency, I loved saving endangered species. I was blessed beyond belief to have that be 30 years of my professional career. And I'm even more blessed now to be here with you guys in the trenches with these landowners, saving the most threatened ecosystem on Earth.
One more thing on those legends, and I got to throw back to Adam for this. So Adam's lucky to work with one of these legends. He's down in New Mexico. It's the Weaver family. And Adam, maybe talk a little bit about the Weaver family and what you've observed with their conservation legacy down there. It's a really incredible story.
Yeah, so Jim Weaver was a professor at Cornell, and at some point in his career, he ended up on the plains of eastern New Mexico and absolutely fell in love with the place. Not many people can say that's happened to them, I'll tell you that.
It's tough living down there. Yeah.
Tough living out there. So he, upon retirement, went to New Mexico, bought himself a ranch, and then quickly figured out he could utilize the Grassland Reserves program through NRCS to put easements over his ranch. So he purchased it, then eased it, and got a substantial amount of his money back from his investment. And since then has been working through Grasslands, which is an NGO, to work on restoring his ranch as well as protect other prairie habitats right in the immediate area there in Roosevelt County of eastern New Mexico. So he really became, from my understanding, and I know he could tell his own story better. Maybe we're lucky enough to have him on this podcast.
Yeah, that would be great.
That would be great. But he really became the anchor for all the conservation efforts today in Roosevelt County. You know, he was there first. A lot of the ranchers saw what he did and thought he was crazy for doing it. But then they realized, wait a minute, that's actually really good money to get to keep ranching land ranching. And so that sparked a little bit of interest. Then TNC, the Nature Conservancy, they came in and bought a large ranch, Milnesan Prairie Preserve, it's called. And that's west of Weaver Ranch by, I don't know, 10 miles, 15 miles, give or take. And then we show up. Well, let me back up a little bit. There's some state land. So now the Department of Wildlife, used to be New Mexico Game and Fish, they have purchased state land and have been protecting it and managing it basically for the lesser prairie chicken. And then, of course, you have New Mexico State Land Office that also has revenue generating lands that they basically lease for grazing purposes. But that was a potential additional conservation game that I'll come back to here in a little bit. So you have Weaver Ranch, you had TNC's Milnesan Prairie Preserve, you had the PCAs, as they call them, for Department of Wildlife, prairie chicken areas. And you started to have the good seeds for a stronghold for lesser prairie chicken. And that's where Wayne and I came in. We cut a deal with some Weaver neighbors, the Kaiser family, and we have established Lost Draw Conservation Bank, which currently permanently protected. We're talking about 5,000 acres. We have the ability to scale that way up, another 9,000 acres. Then, because of the state land office, they recently did a deal with NextEra Energy, where there's a transmission line going in right between Milnesan Prairie Preserve and then a few miles from Lost Draw and Weaver Ranch that crossed state land office land. And so as part of the right-of-way agreement, state land office asked NextEra to do some additional conservation. And it's just such a cool story. NextEra funded conservation leases on state land office land. So that's a 30-year lease to make sure that There are not going to be any utility scale wind developments or solar developments or even transmission lines crossing the property. And that land is still available for ranching. So that's 20,000 acres worth 30-year conservation. But on top of that, they did another 6,000 acres of private land permanent conservation. And that filled in the donut hole that's between Weaver Ranch on one side, TNC on the other. We had a little bit of lost draw, and now we have another 6,000 acre block that's right there permanently protected. And then you have a bunch of state land office that fills in the gap that's now protected for the next 30 years. So I am proud to be part of that. Jim Weaver started it, and we just helped it gain a little bit of momentum. But he is a pioneer several times over when it comes to conservation.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Willard Heck as ranch manager too. But Adam, that's people can say they want about conservation bankers, and there's some people that have said some things that aren't overly complimentary to us. But I can tell you, we're deal junkies, but the difference is we're conservation deal junkies. And Adam facilitated all that down there. So of the, I think the mass 10,000 acres or something like that, Adam. I mean, about a quarter of that was bank credits. The rest you put together, and really just working with using your relationships with landowners and game and fish and all the good folks there in the state land office, all the good folks there. And, we appreciate NextEra funding the whole deal. That was some really good corporate stewardship there. So just a huge win for the prairie chicken in Mexico. And we're hoping to replicate that model. And, other states have a lot of state land like Colorado, not so much in Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas, but just primarily private landowners there. But yeah, we're really jazzed about what's going on there.
The agencies, the conservation agencies at the state level, they sometimes refer to our model as transactional conservation. I'm just fine with that. That's what it takes. When it's private land rights, that's exactly what it takes. It takes.
That's what it should be. That's what it should be.
And the landowners want transactions. And a lot of times the landowners, we've had many landowners, we say, well, why haven't you done easement with the government? Or why haven't you done this program, that program? And some have. Some have done both. We've got landowners in Kansas. They've done a lot of different programs and supportive programs. But at the end of the day, they like dealing with us. We're businessmen, and we're kind of in between them and the government. And, we've worked well with the government programs too, and hope to do a lot more with them soon. But they like dealing with other businessmen, and they like the transactional nature of it. And that, once the contract's done, it may be a little complicated, but once it's done, it's done. And, it's just a lot simpler going forward for them.
Well, Ted, hey, you're not just a guest. You can be a host too if you'd like. You have any questions for us? You want to throw out some ideas for discussion?
You kind of answered one already. I can see the excitement in you guys just in this conversation, others we've been having recently about the path forward. I mean, your business model kind of went away when less prairie chickens were delisted, and that mitigation obligation part went away. But I know I don't know. You guys probably thought of it first, but I've always had the idea that we want the federal government to buy bank credits for recovery, not just private industry buy them for mitigation. Because the best mitigation you do is to keep us at par. If the government buys them for recovery, it actually recovers and delists lesser prairie chickens, like my mentors and predecessors did 27 years ago with Prairie and Falcon. And so I spent my whole life interested in recovering and delisting endangered species, and we're at a really exciting point in the chapter for lesser prairie chickens in the southwestern Great Plains. So thank you guys for that excitement and that vision and your leadership.
Well, we're just out here trying to make a buck and trying to save a species. So it's just part of the day's work. You really are dumping blood, sweat, and tears from your retirement into this new NGO, the LPC LA. And you are asking for a lot. You've really got some admirable big objectives in terms of conservation models on the southern Great Plains and actually, the Great Plains. I think your idea will spread if it's successful from the southern Great Plains to the northern Great Plains. So I'm a huge fan of what you've managed to accomplish to date. But you've obviously put a lot of your own personal, emotional breadth and depth into this. So have you thought about where you feel like you'd be if it just doesn't work. I mean, you're asking for a lot of money, a lot of dedication out of government programs. And we all know that the budget, I guess rather we should say the deficit, the negative budget that we seem to be running these days, at some point, these government programs are going to buckle under that pressure. And we are seeing from this administration, they're already saying enough is enough, and we can't just keep giving, giving, giving. So what if all three of us are in a point where, we just can't accomplish what we're asking the government to accomplish? Where would where would that leave you? How would you feel?
Yeah. So first of all, interestingly to me, in the conservation community, none of us are thinking nearly big. We're all still looking for crumbs to kind of try to slow the loss of grasslands here and there. And what the West Chicken Land Alliance and the North American Grouse Partnership are saying is continuing to lose 2 million acres of grasslands every single year in North America is unacceptable. Now, our experience with your program and the Farm Bill Plus, it only takes 1.5 to 2.5 times more per acre than existing programs to save grasslands. And if we don't do it, this is our last chance. If we don't save lesser prairie chickens this time, our children's children will not have lesser prairie chickens on the face of the earth. Okay? That's what's at stake. And there's just nothing motivates you when your back is against the wall. And these ranchers feel that way. These ranchers love lesser prairie chickens. They won't say it with an outside voice, but they really do. They love the land. They value the ranching tradition.
Yeah.
And they're desperate to be successful, and they see us as their greatest opportunity. I've had a couple of LPCLA members say to me, I've been in this for 30 years, and I've never had more hope that we're actually going to turn the corner than I do right now. Several of our ranchers have said that about the Grouse Partnership and you guys. So this is it. We've got to succeed now.
Yeah, exactly. And I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina. Actually, I grew up in Charlotte, but I went to college in the mountains of North Carolina. And I learned how to whitewater paddle, right, in a kayak. And the first lesson I learned, which has stuck with me and I apply it through life now, is don't look where you don't want to go, because that's exactly where you're going to end up. Focus on where you want to be.
And being a liberated bureaucrat, every day I get to wake up and ask myself, what are the top 3 things I need to do today to move the needle? And then that's how I spend my time. It's really fun and exciting. So you're right, Adam. I mean, we need to keep our focus and just keep moving our feet. And we're going to get there. I mean, everyone I talk to about our ideas and our programs, not only does nobody tell me no, everybody says yes. Everybody sees the value and the need and the urgency. And that's why we're going to succeed.
Yeah, and I tell you, I don't know if I've given you this update yet, Ted, but last week I was in DC. I met with the top levels of NRCS. And as you know, we're trying to leverage NRCS programs to support the 250 for 250. And, they pressure tested our model. And our model basically is using the Sustains Act, which is an act that was passed in 2023 under the U.S. Congress, designed to bring private and state dollars into existing NRCS programs as matches, and then using NRCS's ASEP ALE, that's Agricultural Conservation Easement Programs, agricultural land easements. It's redundant program title, but let's not worry about that. Using the ASEP ALE program to go buy recovery credits through our programmatic conservation banking agreement. So in order to do that, though, NRCS has to operate a little differently than they're used to operating. That ASEP program is designed to pay 50% of conservation easement value. So what they do is they go have an outside appraiser appraise the value of ranch land. And they then take that number, they cut it in half, and they pay that half of the value. Well, that won't work for recovery credits, because as we talked about earlier, recovery credits do require easements, but that's only one of the 3 legs of that stool. The other part that's most valuable really is the non-wasting endowment that spins off interest every year to fund the long-term management plan. So we talked to NRCS and we said, we need you to do 2 things. Number 1, we need you to make lesser prairie chicken habitat grasslands of special environmental significance. That's a statutory term, GSS for short, that turns a switch in ASAP from 50% call share to 75% call share. And then the second thing we need you to do is, instead of just appraising the conservation easement value, appraise the value of recovery credits and make that the basis for the 70% call share. If you do those two things, and Fish and Wildlife Service seems very clear signals to industry that if we hit a conservation target of 250,000 acres, we don't have to list this bird. That will turn on the Sustains Act, and the Sustains Act would become a funnel of private dollars, industry making that 25% contribution to then match with NRCS funds. We have appropriated money through ASAP. We have enough appropriated money through ASAP, through the existing farm bill, that we can get this done. We just need the political will in DC to say, do it.
And we're sending our Les Bridging Land Alliance is sending our letters to the secretaries next week.
Awesome.
Oh,
well,
good.
I just want to let you know that I heard from the top levels at NRCS, you're correct. These are discretionary switches, and we can do it with the right political will, and we want to find a way to yes.
Well, we're going to get there.
Yeah.
That's great work, Adam. Great leadership, you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ted, for being here, and please keep it up. We're all rowing the same direction, and if we can get this first 250 done, there's no reason why we can't keep it going.
And it would be a different way of managing the Endangered Species Act, right?
Yes.
Why not use government resources and government programs to prevent regulatory pressure on industry and ranchers and other landowners? I mean, it doesn't make any sense that we regulate in order to, provide an incentive for recovery. Why don't we provide different incentives for recovery so we don't have to regulate?
But the way I think about it is, we can spend 60 cents to not get what we want, or $1 to get what we want.
Yeah, it's a better value for the taxpayer too.
That's it.
People talk about CRP being great. Look, CRP's done a lot to help the chicken, for sure. But one of our other partners, legacy partners, just says, how many times we got to pay for CRP, right? And we don't really solve the problem. And with permanent easements and permanent funds to maintain the quality habitat that the ranchers have started themselves and are great stewards of it, then you solve a problem, and you also reduce a deficit, a budgetary item in the future for the taxpayers.
Yeah, Ted, can't tell you how much appreciate you being here. Keep up the good hard work, and let us know if we can help.
You definitely can, and we will, I'm sure, only be coming closer and closer together in our trips to DC.
Sounds good. All right, guys.
All right. Thanks.
Great.
All right.